Okay, welcome everybody for 2025 second term China Today. This is the second one in the second term. We are still on the U.S. China trade. I call it trade war. Okay, it is war. And last Saturday, China and U.S. has settled a have reached an agreement. But that agreement, I will ask, last time, I will ask AI to give us a overview. So this is screen sharing here. Okay, share. This is from Clark, the AI provided by X or Twitter. And the question I'm asking the AI to answer is, the US and China has reached a temporary tariff agreement. What are the remaining tariffs on major categories for each other? They have an agreement, and then there will be a pause for 19 days. And the agreement is effective May 14, and that significantly reduced the tariffs, but retains certain duties on major categories. So the following is a breakdown. The U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods, okay, there are a 10% reciprocal tariffs, which is announced in 2nd of April 2025. So that remains. Initially, U.S. applied 34% on Chinese goods, all Chinese goods. Chinese responded the same with 34%. Then Trump said China retaliated, so add another 50%. China followed with another 50%. Then Trump said, I will raise it to 125. So China said, I will do the same. I raise it to 125. And Trump added another 10%, another 20%. So the U.S., before this agreement, has 145% on all products coming from China. China no longer want to play these number games, so whatever response from U.S., China stay with 125% on all imports from United States. That basically stopped the oil trade. This stopping obviously is unsustainable, and therefore they reached an agreement last Saturday. Okay, last Saturday they actually meet about just before lunch, and then they extend their meeting in the afternoon. So that is Saturday. On Sunday, they meet again for the whole day. And then they said they will have both sides will have a public statements on Monday. And then there are 2 days before the agreement in place. So that is why it is set at 14th of May. So what the agreement is that there are 10% the reciprocal tariffs, which Trump applied to every country. So Trump is not going to back down on that one. And in February and March 2025, due to the precursors of fentanyl, then it places a 20% tariffs, and that stay as well. And also some other previous tariffs on specific items like steel and aluminum still stay on. So aluminum, then it is 25% plus 10%. So it's 35%. For electrical vehicles, 100% plus 10%, so 110%. Solar products, solar panels, etc., 50% plus 10%, so it says 60%. And there's another additional before the Trump era, so that is another 20 to 50%. So there's a lot of tariffs on solar panels. Automobiles, 25% plus 10%. Semiconductors, some of the previous semiconductors tariffs, 25%, and critical minerals, etc., plus the 10%. Low value e-commerce shipments, then it also has a tax. So there's a note here. Before this April escalation, the average tariff is 20.8%. So there is still another 10% plus a whole lot more others. What about the Chinese? Chinese didn't respond to the fentanyl tariffs by tariffs. China responded by adding tariffs on certain products from United States and banning the sale of rare earths minerals to United States. So this agreement retained that 10% reciprocal tariffs. And China has also suspended or removed non-tariff countermeasures, export restriction on rare earth materials, or blacklisting of U.S. firms. So the specific is that the tariffs on U.S. agricultural products imposed as retaliation for U.S. fentanyl-related tariffs remain in place. So that refers to a selected agricultural goods, which is 10 to 15%. And in 2020, Chinese tariffs on U.S. agricultural products were around 21% on average, covering about $19 billion imports. Soybeans, a major U.S. export to China. And unfortunately, this has been redirected. And that is energy, both coal and LNG, 15% remaining. Crude oil, 10%. Agricultural machinery, large displacement car and pickup trucks, 10%. Rare earth material and other non-tariff measures lifted all these restrictions. So this agreement is certainly very good. So this is the summary. The summary is here. Baseline, 10%, 10%. The fentanyl related tariffs, US haven't lifted, China haven't got that. Steel, China haven't got that. Aluminum, China haven't got that. Electric vehicle, also China have no increasement. Solar products, China have no increasement. Automobiles, 25% versus 10%. Semiconductors, 25% versus nothing. Critical minerals, 25% versus nothing. Then agricultural products, this is now the other way around. China, US have none, and China's is 10 to 15%. Energy, 50% for coal and LNG. Oil, 10%. Machinery, 10%. Pickup trucks, 10%. Then low value e-commerce, 54%. Or $100 minimum fees. Okay, so with this, I'll continue to ask for another questions. What are the impact of the agreement on the negotiations of tariffs for the rest of the world? Trump's claim that there is 150 countries willing to negotiate with United States for the reciprocal tariffs. And just yesterday, they said there are too many countries negotiating with United States. The department cannot handle all of them within the 19 days temporary back down. So U.S. said it will write letters to each country and specify the tariffs and expect all these countries to respect U.S. decision. So whether that will happen or not, we don't know. But anyway, here is the question I asked Clark. In terms of thinking about the global trade, U.S. imposed tariffs on everybody is against the TWO regulations, the World Trade Organization. We know that the previous version is actually the global tariff agreements, which eventually evolved to become today's World Trade Organization. Each of the countries entering World Trade Organization has negotiated for a very long time. The shortest time negotiations for any country to enter WTO is 2 years. So it is very unlikely that all the tariffs that U.S. imposed to the other country can be negotiated within 19 days. That is beyond expectation. And therefore, people have to think about that. Given China and U.S. are the largest economy in the world, the first and the second largest, so their trade relationship will define almost the rest of the world, how the trade will eventually goes. So a lot of countries actually waiting to see what happens to United States and China and take ideas from U.S. and China's negotiation to guide their own negotiation with the United States. So there are incentives for other countries to align strategically. The tariff suspension creates pressure on other countries to choose sides in the U.S.-China trade dynamic, as it signals a shift towards bilateral managed trade agreements over multilateral trade frameworks like the WTO. Now, WTO was originally sponsored and created by United States. Now, United States becomes the first member to actually disrupt the rules and the frameworks of the World Trade Organization. Once that framework is disrupted, the only other frameworks available is a regional trade agreement as well as bilateral agreement. Now, there are several regional agreements in place. For example, in the North America, Canada, United States, and Mexico has a free trade agreement. And there are also an extended version which allows South Americans products to enter United States at almost zero tariffs. In terms of Asia here, we have the RCEP, regional, I can't remember what's the exact name, RCEP, RCEP. This agreement is originated by the Asian countries plus 3 other countries, China is not part of the Asian countries, but China is in this RCEP agreement. And then the other two is Australia and Japan, probably New Zealand and South Korea as well. So RCEP cover Southeast Asia. And there are also other bilateral agreements, for example, through the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then there is other trade relationship, for example, through the BELS and Roads Initiative. So there are still other trade relationships outside of WTO, but obviously United States single-handedly break the rules of WTO, and I think this organization is now in crisis. Countries may compelled to negotiate with either US or China to secure favorable trade terms. For instance, US is actively negotiating with India, Japan, Canada, Mexico, and the EU, while China is strengthening ties with BRICS countries. India negotiations with the US highlight potential fractures within BRICS, as some members lean towards China, while most members lean towards China except India. South Africa, as the G20 president in 2025, has remained neutral, but the agreement may push other G20 nations to engage more actively in trade talks to avoid potential being sidelined. So the impact is shift towards bilateral relationship as well as regional relationship. There is pressure to match tariff reductions. Tariffs is a state-to-state relationship. So as a sovereign state, they will match any other tariffs imposed on their companies. So basically everybody will be matching, except very small economies which cannot put up a real fight. China's suspension of non-tariff measures may encourage other nations to offer non-tariff concessions in exchange for US tariff relief. And we now know that Trump's reciprocal tariffs is actually a tactic rather a strategy. A tactic means it will change depending on the real situation. It is only a means to an end. A strategy is a long-term planned actions in order to achieve some goals or some objectives. I will personally think it is more like a tactics rather than a strategy. And with this in mind, that means tariffs can change very quickly. For example, the tariffs between United States and China changed after 2 days of talk, and then 2 days of cooling off, then it come to effect. This is a very rapid change. For example, the goods from China to the west coast of the United States will take about 20 to 30 days. And the goods that will go through Panama Canal to the east coast of United States will take another 7 to 15 days longer. And therefore, any decisions will have very huge impact on the shipping We will cover that a little bit later on. Here it says the volatility creates uncertainty for investors and businesses. As the 90 days pause keeps the threat of tariffs reinstated looming, pushing countries to negotiate quickly. But unfortunately, in real life, that is not possible. With limited manpower from the United States negotiating with over 150 countries. So only 90 days. And then if we exclude some holidays, weekends, etc., I would say there is about 90 days, let's say exclude 10 days, that will be 80 days. In these 80 days, you negotiate with 150 countries. That means on average, you need to reach an agreement in half a day or 2 countries per day, which is not possible. Trade negotiation is not that simple. So this 90 days is unrealistic. China's ability to secure a significant U.S. tariff rollback without major concessions strengthen its position in negotiations with other countries. Beijing's charm offensive, targeting nations like Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Canada, aims to counter U.S. influence and build coalitions against U.S. tariffs. For example, China has imposed a trilateral free trade agreement with Japan and South Korea. Now, this free trade agreement between China, Japan, and South Korea has been in talk for over 10 years. Because of historical reasons, meaning during the Second World War, Japan invaded both China and South Korea and caused huge bloodshed in these 2 countries. So having a trade agreement between them 3 has been deemed impossible, although it has been in discussions for over 10 years. But it seems that Trump has successfully made this trade agreement possible. And now China, Japan, and South Korea will have a free trade agreement among these 3 countries. Now maybe I can explain a little bit what is tariffs. Tariffs is when for example, I come from China, I have a shipment from China, certain goods, say at value $100, arriving in the U.S. port. The importer will have to take the goods from customs. At that point, the custom will ask for the tariffs. Let's say we still have a 30% tariffs. That means the importer has to pay $30 in order to take the goods out from the holding of the custom warehouse. So the original $100 cost, which have to be sent to the Chinese manufacturer when the goods arrived at the port. So that $100 is already sent because the goods arrived at the port. Then the importer paid the tariffs, making the products now $130. That is the cost. Then plus all the distribution, all the other things on the chain to the final customer, that may be another doubling. So the original product may be selling at, let's say, $100, $200. Now it will becomes $260 because of the tariffs. So tariffs are tax on the goods collected by the government. So when consumer buy the products, they pay for the tariffs, and of course the profits for each layer of the distribution, the retailer, the distributor, and so forth. When you have no tariffs, that means consumers can get products cheaper. So by applying a tariff, you protect the industry producing the product, because if the industry can produce the product, for example, China's product is $100, but local manufacturing can produce it a bit higher than imports, let's say $110. Then if you apply a 30% tariff, then to the distributor, to the importers, it will be cheaper to get it locally because it will cost them $110 rather than from China, which will be $100 plus $30 tariff, costing $130. We know that products has a volume to price curve, and that curve will depend on the elasticity of the product. If it is a product which have no elasticity, that means you have to buy it. There's no other way around. Then any price increase will be able to apply into the final product to the consumer. But if there is large price elasticity, that means if the price is too high, I don't need to buy it. Then the importer have to bear the cost. That means at least part of the cost in order to continue to sell the product. So the profit margin may be cut down, and that profit margin has shifted from the importer to the government tax as government tax revenue. But the consumer still pay higher. So this is also a tax to the local consumer. So Trump's idea of tariffs have two objectives. Whether there are other objectives, we don't know, but there are two stated objectives. One is counter U.S. trade deficit, which is about $1.2 trillion in 2024. Another is to bring manufacturing back to the United States, as I explained just a little time ago. Okay, let's look at geopolitical ripple effects. The deal reduces the immediate risk of global recession, boosting stock markets and easing supply chain disruption, which benefits both countries negotiating with US or China. However, the US perceived retreat may weaken its credibility in trade talks, encouraging other nations to adopt China's defiant stance rather than rushing to negotiate. Now, that has appeared in the negotiation of US and EU. It also has appeared to the negotiation between US and Japan. Both Japan and EU has become standing firmer in their negotiations. The agreements focus on strategic decoupling, signals that future negotiations with other countries will prioritize national security, potentially leading to higher tariffs on sensitive sectors globally. In terms of global competition for the next decades, there are several sectors. One important sector, as I demonstrated last time and this time, is artificial intelligence. At the moment, there are two major powers in artificial intelligence. I'm using an AI from United States. And I also use AI from China as well. Just after the talk of the tariffs between United States and China, the BIS, Business Industrial Security Council, whatever that is, I can't remember the exact name, issue a guidance to the world, not just to the United States. A United States government department issue a guidance to the rest of the world. That guidance consists of two parts. Part number one is about hardware. US claimed that Huawei's AI chips, the Ascend 9010B, 9010C, 9010D, may be made using US technologies, which violate the US ban on exporting technology to Huawei. And therefore, any countries in the world, any person in the world using AI chips from Huawei, especially those chips I just mentioned, may violate US export control and may deem punishable by US laws. In other words, that means the US is trying to block the export of China's chips to the rest of the world. Now, that will not happen for a few years because the demand of this high performance calculation, the chips, the AI chips, is huge in China. I don't think Huawei will be able to fill that gap easily within the next few years. So the chance of these chips being used on bulk around the world, exported from China, is small. I don't think there is a huge chance of that happening. But the Chinese companies using Huawei's chip in China to train their AI model is very likely. After all, the United States have banned some of the high-performing NVIDIA chips, which is used in AI training, to China. So NVIDIA, China being its largest customer, deliberately manufacture some chips with limited performance in order to be sold in China. That means Chinese company trying to train AI models are forced to use inferior chips from NVIDIA, whereas the world can use the advanced chips from NVIDIA to train their AI models. So that is one of the restrictions. The second part of the restriction is on using Chinese AI models. The United States claimed that Chinese AI model might pose national security risk. Therefore, any other countries using American technology, that means NVIDIA chips, running Chinese AI models may cause national security risk to both its own country as well as to America, and therefore might subject to America's control. So that means the second part of this is, now the first part is limiting the Chinese hardware. The second part is limiting Chinese software, the trained models. You can't run trained models on American technologies platforms. That is a significant escalation of trade. So the trade relationship between United States and China is very complex. On one hand, both sides reduce their ridiculous, unsustainable tariffs to 10% plus all the other everything else. But on the other hand, the trade tensions focus on the next important human breakthrough, the artificial intelligence. So I have talked about the impact on other regions. For example, EU. EU is now a little bit more firm. In Asia Pacific, the free trade agreement with Japan and South Korea becomes possible because of the US tariffs. And there's another question I ask the artificial intelligence. We know China and United States are mutually dependent on each other. But if the trade war develops to a state when there is a complete stop of trade between United States and China, what will happen? Now, that is a very interesting question. I will go to that a little bit later on. Okay, we will jump through all this. So for a short-term time frame within 90 days, it opened up windows for negotiations. U.S. has also some pressures. Conclusion: the U.S.-China trade agreement reshapes global tariff negotiations by accelerating bilateralism, increasing strategic alliance pressure, and highlighting the limits of unilateral tariff strategies. While it reduces immediate economic risk, the temporary nature of the deal and the persistence of high tariffs on strategic sectors ensure ongoing uncertainty. Countries like EU, Japan, Canada will likely intensify negotiations with the US to match China's tariff reduction, while China's diplomatic outreach may pull others like BRICS, Southeast Asia into its orbits. The next 90 days will be critical as the outcome of the US-China trade talks would set the tone for global trade relationships, with a risk of renewed escalation if no permanent deal is reached. So I asked also about the shipping. We know that this sudden fluctuation of tariffs means the importers are faced with huge uncertainty. China is the main manufacturing hub of the world. China is the factory of the world. A lot of manufactured goods goes from China to the United States. That represents a huge amount of trade. For these physical goods to move from China to the United States, we need shipping. Therefore, I asked about the impact on global shipping. So what is the magnitude and impact on the global shipment, in particular those between United States and China? So it repeat about the reduction, and then we go to here. Pre-agreement. Prior to the agreement, the U.S.-China trade plummeted due to high tariffs. Ocean container bookings from China to U.S. dropped 60% industry-wide in 3 weeks following the April 2025 tariff hikes, with some estimates suggesting 80% plus collapse in container traffic. Then, after the agreement, there is a huge surge. The surge will make use of these 19 days windows. So the logistic executives report thousands of preloaded containers in China ready to ship, with a significant increase in bookings anticipated over the next 4 to 6 weeks. The U.S. tariffs will apply to goods which leave the Chinese ports on the end of that 90 days. So given that the goods from China to United States using containers take 20 to 30 days, that means from now on and then 120 days later, if there's no further agreement, then the tariffs will go back to 145%, and therefore it will stop. But during the next 120 days, in which we have a 90 days windows of lower tariffs, then the shipment will be peak. People will try to use as much shipment as possible to move as much goods from China to United States. And therefore, the impact on tariffs on consumer spending will be delayed by about 4 months from now. 4 months later, we will see if there's no further agreement. When the tariffs go up, then the products, the goods on American shelves will increase in price. But still, within the next 120 days, given there are still 30% tariffs on Chinese goods entering United States, 20% from the fentanyl and 10% on the reciprocal, so 30%. American goods are going to increase in price, but the impact is only about 2% on the inflation, because American also consumes quite a bit of domestically produced products. For example, food. America is a huge agricultural country. It actually exports a lot of food. So food basically will remain cheap. Energy. Trump encouraged drill, and therefore there will be more products, more energy coming out from the ground in America, and therefore fuel is going to lower, and therefore electricity price, the gasolines, etc., will go down in price. And therefore the contribution of this tariff war is expected to be about 2%. Before the agreement, since there's no shipment basically almost stopped, not completely, because there are still other products which have no elasticity. So whatever the price, you still have to import it from China. So the shipment is still good, but the major carriers responded by reducing capacity 20 to 28%. using smaller vessels, for example. Now, after this agreement, suddenly, within 2 days, then the shipping demand increased. Now, container ships can't increase or decrease its capacity overnight because many container ships are en route doing whatever they are doing. And so, for example, when a company changed the size of the container ship from the larger one to smaller one to run between United States and China, then these bigger ships will be routed to do other routes. They may take 20, 30 days or even longer in order to finish the current routes and then come back to port and then change destination and do another different routes. So it will take time. Therefore, now, before the April 2nd, there are goods already loaded into containers, waiting to be shipped to the United States. But the sudden increase in tariffs, making the importer pause the shipments. So there are containers already loaded in China, waiting to go onto a container ship. And therefore, these are the products which will be directly available to ship across the Pacific. But there are new orders, and these orders must be made. That means the products must be made before it can be loaded. And therefore, we will expect to see in the second quarter of 2025, China's export will increase because of this window of opportunity. And the value may also increase because when the cost of shipment is high, you don't want to ship low value goods. You want to ship as much as high value goods in order to maximize the shipment capability. So I will expect the second quarter trade numbers from China will increase in its amount of export. Meaning in the third and fourth quarter, we may see a decline of trade between US and China if there's no further agreement. And go back to these high tariffs. Container market growth, because suddenly we have more demand. There are pressures on the shipment cost. So it's already raised 9%. And then there will be expected port congestion in United States, especially Los Angeles and Long Beach, which are both in California. And when a huge amount of container ships arriving, then the ships arrive in the port and it is offloaded. And then other goods load into the container ship and the ship will leave the port. But the containers in the port need to be delivered to the rest of America. And that delivery depends on trucks. And the amount of trucks available to move these containers away is quite limited. And therefore, there will be a congestion when there are more than the normal amount of containers coming in. Of course, in terms of stock market, that is good news. So the transport industry, most of them increase, and on average, 7%. The trade war has stalled nearly $600 billion in two-way US-China trade, disrupting global supply chains. the agreement's rollback of over 100% of tariffs is expected to restore significant trade flows, but not completely. We have Shen, Tmail, etc., which is business to customers online platform. The U.S. imposed a $100 flat fee on the USPS shipments under $800. So there is a significant increase in cost for the final customers. And with this relief of 19 days, the U.S. companies have the chance to replenish its inventory. We talked about the logistic capacity challenge already. Cathay Pacific. About 2 weeks, that means in the middle of April, Trump announced that all the electronic products from China to United States are not subject to these reciprocal tariffs. So electronics and high-tech basically is stable in that sense. But we don't know what happened if further negotiations will break that. For the other things like clothing, footwear, etc., that is a rollback, but it's still having a huge tariffs. Toys and consumer goods, 30%. That means U.S. customers are going to see this impact on at least the clothing, footwear, and consumer products like toys, etc. And therefore, with this, at the moment, there are the trade capacity are now limited by two things. One is the number of container ships running between Chinese ports and U.S. ports. The other is number of containers. We run out of containers, just like during the COVID. During the COVID, almost the world stopped manufacturing, except China. Now, China stopped it from February to April in 2020. And then Chinese manufacturing basically resumed, while the rest of the world stopped. So goods are leaving Chinese ports, arriving at the world everywhere. The container dropped down, but there's nothing to load back to the container ship. So the ship almost go empty back to China and take more goods out. Therefore, at that time, there is a shortage of containers, and also caused the global second-hand containers price to drop, because in a lot of places, the container comes in, eventually unloaded. The empty container has nothing to put on to ship back to China. And if the cost of the shipment is higher than making a new one, this container will not be shipped back to China, and therefore becomes lower price in the area, making use of this container in various ways. And of course, the variation is not limited to containers. It's also reflected in the price of shipment. This uncertainty and long-term planning is a very difficult situation at the moment. Okay, the next question. Since the Liberation Day tariffs, China has redirected some of its imports from US to other countries. Assuming there's no further change to the tariffs, how the trade between these two countries will continue in the next few years. Will the trade imbalance increase? Okay, pre-Liberation Day trade. US imported $427 billion worth of goods from China and exported $195 billion to China, resulting in a $232 billion goods trade deficit. China's share of US imports was 13.9%, down from 19.2% in 2018. So remember, this is the second trade war between US and China by Trump. In 2018, Trump started his first round of trade war with China using tariffs. From that onwards, anticipating that Trump will come back in second term, China has already prepared for Trump's regaining office in the White House. So the export to to United States from China has been changed. China reduced its dependency on US, and US also reduced its dependency on China. But many of the demand on China's goods has been redirected to a third country. China diversified. Americans pay higher because the same goods may go through a third country. Okay, what happened after the Liberation Day? China reduced its oil imports by 90%, shifting to Canada and Middle East suppliers. For agricultural products, soybeans, beef, poultry imports, source them from Brazil, Australia, and Argentina. Energy, US coal and LNG, source it from Russia and Australia. And the Chinese export now go to Southeast Asia, for example, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia. And 5% of these goods are routed through this third country and eventually come up to United States anyway. So the current tariff, including 10% baseline, 30% fentanyl, is still high because there are some countries, for example, Vietnam, only 10%. So there will be a lot of other goods going through, for example, Vietnam, Malaysia, rather than directly from China to America. So the projected trade dynamics between the next 3 years under Trump, using the current tariffs, 30% tariffs on Chinese goods, 10% from the Chinese side on US goods, will keep the level down. Of course, you have trade tariffs that will reduce trade volume. We can take a lesson from history. In the 1920s, there's also a tariff war. At that time, mainly is the European and its colonies. The tariffs increased by about 30%, but the global trade decreased by 66%. and cause a global depression. So this round, the tariff is much, much higher, 10% minimum, and most of the countries is over 10%. For example, China 34%, some other countries 50%. So it's huge. So the impact on the global trade is unprecedented. Have no historical comparison. It's even higher than history. But at the same time, the interdependency of the supply chain is different from today than 100 years ago. Today, almost all manufacturers will use other products in its supply chain. There's no single company in the world which will manufacture from raw material to final product. The raw material will go through some other companies making it into some parts, and that parts assembled into other parts before it finally arrives in the factory as a part of the final product. So that's interdependency is much deeper today than before. So that is called the supply chain resilience. On average, the global supply chain resilience is very poor. China has almost single-handedly controlled the whole supply chain of most of the products produced today. China is the only country in the world which has all the industry represented by United States nations of categories of industry. China is the only one country which has industry in all categories. Maybe not every industry is leading edge, but there are still very important impact. Okay, now I'm not going to go through all this now. I would rather switch to a more immediate question. I just bought a roast duck from what's that called? Something China in Doncaster Road. Okay, the roast duck, the whole roast duck is 45 Australian dollars. Now, give you a guess. How much is a roast duck, Beijing duck, served in the Beijing duck style? That means you have the pancake, you have the vegetables, and the sauce, and the duck being roasted, ready to eat. How much it will cost in China? In second or third tier cities. Of course, you in China, the same food can range from very cheap to very expensive, depending on the restaurants, depending on which city you are in. A first tier city, in the usual tourist area, the price is high. But if you go to, say, third tier cities, and you eat like local, what will that cost? A Beijing duck in China. Anyone want to put a guess? No?
$10?
Sorry? I can translate it into Chinese dollars, but what do you think you will pay in Australian dollars for a Beijing duck in third tier cities in China?
$5. $10?
Sorry?
$5.
$5. Anyone else? you are almost on the mark, $5. At the moment, it's quoting as about 20 yuan. 20 yuan. So there was a question. How can Chinese duck be so cheap? Chinese duck, this one will cost about $300 to 300 yuan in a restaurant. Okay, so that will cost 300, about $80 Australian, factor 4. But in some local areas, you can get it for $20, 20 yen. So there is a calculation. How can that be achieved? So let's look at the data. Hey, where's that data? Let me put that back for my history. History, I need to go to the history. Okay, this is what you can read me by date. Oh, by group. Here, this one. This is in Chinese, but I can translate it into English. Okay, give me a translation. Translation in, okay, and then I can translate it into another language. Okay? Translate into English. Where's my this using Google Translate? Yes. Translate to another language. Of course, I want to translate into English. Okay, do the translation. Now, and then look at the price. I want you to look at the price. No, not this, not this. Not this page. I want another page. History. By date. Yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. And okay, this page. Can you? Okay, I translate it into English. A roaster sold on the street for 18 yuan. Is this hormone containing duck? Can we eat it? Is that from unknown source? Using fast-growing ducks and hairless duck to attract attention. Okay, now somebody have done a research and show all the pricing. Where's the pricing? Not really. Okay, there are different types of ducks. There are different types of ducks. There are 3 different types. We are talking about this kind, small one, about 800 grams. And they are sold without the head and the neck, just the body. Okay. Now, look at this different cost. That's the market value of these small ducks. They call white strip ducks. Is about 2 kilograms, about 1.9 to 2 kilograms. And the feed to weight ratio is 1.6 to 1. That means for this 2 kilogram duck, you will need times 1.6, about 3.6 kilogram of feed. So after roasting, that is about 800 grams or 0.8 kilogram. This meat duck breeding is very short, typically about 30 days. And because their lifespan is so short, you don't need any drugs or vaccines. And the survival rate is about 99%. And to raise this duck, you need about 1 square meter for 8 to 10 ducks. At this low stocking density, then the ducks' feeding, drinking activity will be very healthy. The formula feed for this duck has the appropriate ratio, energy, and protein, and also rich in other minerals, etc., to keep the health. The slaughtering and processing of ducks is completed in large modern processing plants. And this duck has been genetically improved and grow very fast. So there's no need for hormones or military drugs. The disadvantage of this small duck is the growth period of meat duck is shorter, resulting in higher water content in the muscles and tender meat. And that means the meat is more tender because it's more moist. China produces around 300 million to 400 million this kind of ducks every year. Here we are looking at the cost. 1 day old ducklings, $3.2 per duck. Feed cost for 30 days, consume 3 kilograms. That will cost about $7 per duck. A little bit of prevention, etc. At 10 cents to each duck. The labor cost, the depreciation of the house, put it at $1 per duck. So the cost to the farmer is $11.40. And the company allowing about $2 per duck for the farmer. So for the company, it comes in the cost as 13.4 yuan. Each farmer can raise about 5,000 to 8,000 ducks at one time. Let's say these ducks raise 30 days, but we extend it a little bit. So instead of 12 rounds, it will be 10 rounds. Let's say this farmer raised 10 times 5,000 a year. So that will be 50,000 ducks. And $2 per ducks, that means it will be $100,000 a year. It's a very affordable lifestyle for the family. $100,000 per year is in the middle class in China. The per capita GDP in China is 8,000, and this farmer is 100,000. So this farmer is very, very rich. Okay, now for slaughtering these products, okay? After slaughtering, the value becomes 15.5. Now why? Let's look at here. The duck meat itself is sold by meat value, 7.6 RMB per kilogram, and therefore it's about 13.5 per duck. So that is the meat which is sold, okay, to the farmer, to the shopkeeper in the in the market. So this shopkeeper take in the duck as 13.5 yuan, add about $5 something per duck onto it to prepare for the Beijing duck to be sold at $18. So there is a profit of about, let's say, $4. Let's say the shopper can sell 100 ducks per day. That means he is making $400 per day. And again, these shopkeepers are having a very good life because $400 a day, let's say he works for 300 days and take 65 days off, he is still making 300 times 400 is $120,000 per year. Very good life. So how come the whole chain still works? Somebody must be losing money, right? The farmer, the shopkeeper in the market getting the duck almost at cost, going into the slaughtering house. So where is the money coming out? Okay, because we can get a lot of other so-called byproducts, and the byproduct is actually more expensive. The duck down, we can get about $3 from every duck. The nets, China's nets include the duck's head and neck, which is actually more expensive. So it's $1.25 a piece, about $8.2. And the duck's gusset, duck's feet, duck's tongue, duck's intestine, duck's wings, and other parts of the ducks. For example, the fat, the heart, the liver, which is used in hot pot. So all these add together, reduce the cost of 15.5. The company makes 0.73 yuan per duck. But these companies will control 100 to 1,000 farmers. So each farmer will grow, let's say, 50,000 ducks per year, and use times these 50,000 ducks by 100, and then time this by 0.73 yuan per duck. You will see it is making a lot of money. The reason why the rest of the world, like us here, cannot compete in this sense with China is because of this full logistic chain. The duck itself actually make money not by selling the duck itself, it's by selling the so-called byproducts. The downs from the feathers, the other part of the duck, which we consider as waste, becomes valuable products. The only way to do that is you have to go to scale. If you're a small farmer, God knows how long it takes to collect sufficient downs to be sold. But you are in the industrial scale, talking about millions of ducks per year. Then that becomes a business, a huge business. And therefore, it can lower the price. The whole question today is actually how to beat Chinese price to what's that? The competitiveness. How can the rest of the world actually compete in terms of quality and price with China? That is the real question. Trade war won't fix that. Trade war will only increase the consumer's price. And basically that is a tax to its local people. Okay, now there's a few minutes left, so I will open up and let you ask questions. Anyone with any questions? I will welcome any questions. No? Okay, if no questions, then I will finish this today. And then next week, we will continue on this topic. And I will dig into other parts of this Chinese competitiveness. And then look at how other countries, the rest of the world, outside of China, may formulate a strategy to cope with this Chinese huge competitive advantage. What can we do? After all, we are Australian. We need to think about what can we do when there is a huge country which has very competitive edge. Okay.
Hello, Albert.
Yes.
I don't know when the tour to China is. What are the dates?
The dates haven't been fixed yet, but it will be in the later part of October, second part of October. And I still have a few things to finalize. Once that is finalized, I will let UVAs know, including the Box Hill, Deep Dean, and Hawthorne. And I wish they can publish it through the newsletters, and then we can take it from there.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So I will stop the recording.